Church Slavonic and New Church Slavonic is a conservative Slavic liturgical language used by the Orthodox Church in Bulgaria, Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, Russia, Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Republic of Macedonia and Ukraine. The language also occasionally appears in the services of the Orthodox Church in America. It was also used by the Orthodox Churches in Romanian lands until the late 17th and early 18th centuries, as well as by Roman Catholic Croatians in the early Middle Ages. In addition, Church Slavonic is used by some churches which consider themselves Orthodox but are not in communion with the Orthodox Church, such as the Macedonian Orthodox Church, the Montenegrin Orthodox Church, the Russian True Orthodox Church and others. It is also sometimes used by Greek Catholic churches, which are under Roman communion in Slavic countries, for example the Croatian and Ruthenian Greek Catholics, as well as by the Roman Catholic Church. Church Slavonic represents a later stage of Old Church Slavonic, and is a continuation of the liturgical tradition introduced by the Thessalonian brothers Cyril and Methodius in the late 9th century in Nitra, a principal town and religious and scholarly center of Great Moravia, who produced the first Slavic translations of the scripture and liturgy from ancient Greek. By the early 12th century, individual Slavic languages started to emerge, and the liturgical language was modified in pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary and orthography according to the local vernacular usage. These modified varieties or recensions eventually stabilized, and the regularized forms were used by the scribes to produce new translations of liturgical material from ancient Greek, or Latin in case of Croatian Church Slavonic. Attestation of Church Slavonic traditions appear in early Cyrillic and Glagolitic script. Glagolitic has nowadays fallen out of use, though both scripts were used from the earliest attested period. The first Church Slavonic printed book was the Missal Romanum Glagolitus in Angula Glagolitic, followed shortly by 5 Cyrillic liturgical books printed in Krakow in 1491. Recensions. Various Church Slavonic recensions were used as a liturgical and literary language in all Orthodox countries north of the Mediterranean region. During the Middle Ages, even in places where the local population was not Slavic. In recent centuries, however, Church Slavonic was fully replaced by local languages in the non-Slavic countries. Even in some of the Slavic Orthodox countries, the modern national language is now used for liturgical purposes to a greater or lesser extent. Nevertheless, the Russian Orthodox Church, which contains around half of all Orthodox believers, still holds its liturgies almost entirely in Church Slavonic. However, there exist parishes which use other languages. According to the decision of All-Russian Church Council of 1917-1918, service in Russian or Ukrainian can be permitted in individual parishes when approved by church authorities. Ethnic parishes in Russia use the languages Charvash, Mordvinik, Mari, Tatar, Sakha, etc. Autonomous parts of the Russian Orthodox Church prepare and partly use translations to the languages of the local population, as Ukrainian, Belarusian, Romanian, Japanese, Chinese. Parishes in the diaspora, including ones of Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, often use local languages: English, French, Spanish, German, Dutch, Portuguese, etc. Church Slavonic language is actually a set of at least 4 different dialects, with essential distinctions between them in dictionary, spelling, phonetics, etc. The most widespread recension, Russian, has, in turn, several local subdialects with slightly different pronunciations. For the list and descriptions of extinct recensions, see article Old Church Slavonic language. Russian recension. The Russian recension of New Church Slavonic is the language of books since the second half of the 17th century. It generally uses traditional Cyrillic script. However, certain texts can be printed in modern alphabets with the spelling adapted to rules of local languages. Before the 18th century, Church Slavonic was in wide use as a general literary language in Russia. Although it was never spoken per se outside church services, members of the priesthood, poets, and the educated tended to slip its expressions into the speech. During the 17th and 18th centuries, it was gradually replaced by the Russian language in secular literature and was retained for use only in church. Although as late as the 1760s, Lomonosov argued that Church Slavonic was the so-called high style of Russian. During the 19th century within Russia, this point of view declined. Elements of Church Slavonic style may have survived longest in speech among the Old Believers after the late 17th century schism in the Russian Orthodox Church. Russian has borrowed many words from Church Slavonic. While both Russian and Church Slavonic are Slavic languages, some early Slavic sound combinations evolved differently in each branch. As a result, the borrowings into Russian are similar to native Russian words, but with South Slavic variances, e.g. since the Russian Romantic era and the corpus of work of the great Russian authors. The relationship between words in these pairs has become traditional, where the abstract meaning has not commandeered the Church Slavonic word completely. The two words are often synonyms related to one another, much as Latin and native English words were related in the 19th century. One is archaic and characteristic of written high style, while the other is common and found in speech. Standard variant. In Russia, Church Slavonic is pronounced in the same way as Russian, with some exceptions. Church Slavonic features okanye and yekanye i.e., the absence of vowel reduction in unstressed syllables, that is, and in unstressed positions are always readers and tilde respectively, whereas in Standard Russian pronunciation they have different allophones when unstressed. There should be no devoicing of final consonants, although in practice there often is. The letter is never read as tilde. This is also reflected in borrowings from Church Slavonic into Russian. In the following pairs, the first word is Church Slavonic in origin, and the second is purely Russian. The letter gamma can traditionally be read as voiced fricative velar sound. However, occlusive is also possible and legal since the 20th century. When unvoiced, it becomes. This has influenced the Russian pronunciation of isbo. The adjective endings are pronounced as written, whereas Russian are pronounced with instead of. Serbian variant. In Serbia, Church Slavonic is generally pronounced according to the Russian model. The medieval Serbian recension of Church Slavonic was gradually replaced by the Russian recension since the early 18th century. The differences from the Russian variant are limited to the lack of certain sounds in Serbian phonetics. Ukrainian or Russian variant. The main difference between Russian and Ukrainian variants of Church Slavonic lies in the pronunciation of the letter yat. The Russian pronunciation is the same as tilde, whereas the Ukrainian is the same as. Greek Catholic variants of Church Slavonic books printed in variants of the Latin alphabet just contain the letter I for yat. Other distinctions reflect differences between palatalization rules of Ukrainian and Russian in Russian pronunciation and hard in Ukrainian one, different pronunciation of letters and, etc. Typographically, Serbian and Ukrainian editions are almost identical to the Russian ones. Certain visible distinctions may include less frequent use of abbreviations in nomina sacra, treating digraph as a single character rather than two letters. Old Moscow recension. The Old Moscow recension is in use among Old Believers and co-believers. The same traditional Cyrillic alphabet as in Russian synodal recension, however, there are differences in spelling because the Old Moscow recension reproduces an older state of orthography and grammar in general. The most easily observable peculiarities of books in this recension are using of digraph not only in the initial position, hyphenation with no hyphenation sign. Croatian recension. This is in limited use among Croatian Catholics. Texts are printed in the Croatian Latin alphabet or in glagolitic script. Sample editions include Iosif Abecedaryvm Paleoslovenikvm in USUM Glagolitrum, Vejli, 1917, 36+7 6p. Rimsky Misl Slavinskim Jezikom, Sinmisias Izbranymi Misami. Zagreb, Kriskanska Sad Anjost, 1980. Czech recension. This is in very limited use among Czech Catholics. The recension was restored by Professor D. Th. Vojitek Tkardlsik in his editions of the Roman Missal. Rimsky J. Missal Slavinskim Jazykom Izvolgeni Jem Apostolskim za Archibiskupidu Olomouciu Iskusadelia Izden. Olomouc, 1972. Rimsky J. Missal Poveleni Jem Zvitaho Viselenskaho Senma Vatikanskaho Druhaho Obnovgen. Olomouc, 1992. Grammar and style. Although the various recensions of Church Slavonic differ in some points, they share the tendency of approximating the original Old Church Slavonic to the local Slavic vernacular. Inflection tends to follow the ancient patterns with few simplifications. All original 6 verbal tenses, 7 nominal cases, and 3 numbers are intact in most frequently used traditional texts. In Russian recension, the fall of the years is fully reflected, more or less to the Russian pattern, although the terminal continues to be written. The uses are often replaced or altered in usage to the 16th or 17th century Russian pattern. The yat continues to be applied with greater attention to the ancient etymology than it was in 19th century Russian. The letters KSI, Psi, Omega, O, and Digits are kept, as of the letter-based denotation of numerical values, the use of stress accents, and the abbreviations are titula phenomena sacra. The vocabulary and syntax, whether in scripture, liturgy, or church missives, are generally somewhat modernized in an attempt to increase comprehension. In particular, some of the ancient pronouns have been eliminated from the scripture in the Russian recension. Many, but not all, occurrences of the imperfect tense have been replaced with the perfect. Miscellaneous other modernizations of classical formulae have taken place from time to time. For example, the opening of the Gospel of John, by tradition the first words written down by Saints Cyril and Methodius. In the beginning was the Word, were set as in the Ostrog Bible of Ivan Fedorov and as in the Elizabethan Bible of 1751, still in use in the Russian Orthodox Church.